Will you pray with me? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. What signs point you to God? Where do you look for miracles? Most often we look for God in the big, dramatic, technicolor, surround sound experiences of blazing sunsets or meteor showers or mountaintop vistas. You know, the big screen kind of stuff that just screams, God is here. But frankly, few of us spend much time on mountaintops. Most of our lives are lived in the valley of the ordinary. You know, in our kitchens, the traffic jams, the offices, classrooms, the checkout line at the CVS. Places where God is easy to miss. Where are the signs pointing to the holy when we come home from a tough day of work and the house is a mess and there's nothing in the fridge and the bills aren't paid and there's a note from our child's principal again? Forget the blazing sunset. Here is where we need an experience of God. How do we find the miracle in that? Well, our gospel story this morning gives us a hint. Think small and simple. Here we see Jesus not leaping tall buildings in a single bound or reversing the earth's rotation, but using the ordinary stuff of everyday life, bread and water, to remind us that God is here in the small stuff. And, interestingly, that God is also larger than we can ever hope for. Our reading this morning comes from John, and as we know, John's gospel has a very particular flavor. Each of the gospel writers has a specific spin, if you will, on who Jesus is and what he means for us. And each of them use their own favorite language to show us. John's favorite language is metaphor. Mystical ones like darkness and light, truth and life, flesh and spirit, and ordinary ones like vine and branches, doors and gates, bread and water. Stuff you find around you every day, places you might never think to look for God. For as small and simple as these metaphors are, they point to something very powerful. They point to the ultimate reality, to God, whose wonder can never be contained, but is so often hidden. We might call John's gospel the gospel of the unexpected more. More than meets the eye, more than one meaning, more than we can imagine. And John shows us this unexpected more through miracle stories. They are like lived out metaphors. When you come across one in the scriptures, think of it as a signal flare. It marks the ordinary place where something extraordinary is happening. They are signs. But be careful not to get stuck in them, though. For the signs themselves are not the point. It's what they lead us to that matters. As the Buddha says, they are like the finger pointing to the moon. Don't get stuck on the finger. But it's easy to get stuck because fingers are easy to see. And any debate that argues the literal factuality of miracles is stuck on the fingers. Take those specials on the Discovery Channel or Nat Geo, I know you've seen them, where they try to explain the miracles of the Bible. And they bring in archaeologists and geologists and historians, and depending on the theological agenda of the special, they either try to debunk the Bible stories entirely as merely primitive explanations of natural events by superstitious people, or they imply that God really must have interrupted the natural order of things because science can't figure it out. So armed with their ancient maps and their sophisticated technology, they often end with the provocative question, who can say? I love that question. After 45 minutes, who can say, right? As cutting edge as they attempt to be, their premise is flawed. They are looking at these events through an old lens, following an old finger. shall we say, that assumes that these stories were written to explain things about the world, to give us information. But they are missing the point. Miracle stories are not here to explain the natural world or even convince us that Jesus is God because he could multiply loaves and fishes. When you think about it, that's pretty small ball when we're talking about the divine author of the wonders of the universe, right? No, these stories are not to inform us about Jesus. They are to transform us through Jesus. They are here to open our eyes to the true nature of God, to change the way we experience divinity in the world. They are here to point us to something larger. So what is this moon that these miracle stories are pointing us to? That unexpected more that Jesus reveals to us. Paradoxically, to experience that something more, we actually have to start with something kind of small. Our ordinary human lives. That is the truth of this story. For here we see ordinary folks on a hillside and in a boat. Folks with struggles and hopes and dreams and fears. People who are carrying daily burdens about their family and their future. Who worried about how to hold it all together in an overwhelming world. Where could they look for God? What kind of sign did they need? As a people living under the brutality of the Roman Empire, these were folks whose lives were marked by scarcity and fear. All around them were the open wounds of poverty and oppression. The followers of Jesus and Jesus himself were primarily from the peasant class, a group that made up 95% of the population. Their options in life were few, and all of them left them vulnerable to exploitation. Like in every system of domination where the wealth of the few is borne on the backs of the many, these people lived on what might be seen as rations of bread and water. Barely enough to get by, but not enough to look beyond them, not enough to thrive. Where can the people find God in such a world? Well, here comes Jesus. And he offers them a way. In the way that he lives and loves. In the way that he truly sees them and gives them dignity and hope. The way he finds God's presence in the ordinary stuff of life and teaches us to find God there too. Faced with a starving crowd, Jesus takes a few handfuls of food, just whatever a young boy had in his pockets, and transforms them into a feast for thousands. Enough for everyone to have their fill and then some. The miracle of the unexpected more. And then we see his friends stranded in a small boat in the midst of a violent storm, miles out at sea, terrified they will not survive. And Jesus comes to them, walking on the water, urging them not to fear, showing them the buoyancy of God's love. Reminding them that no matter what perils they face, they are never alone. God has got them. The miracle of the unexpected more. But to explain these events away as simply the illusions of gullible people, or as literal wonder-working signs simply to shore up Jesus' divine credentials, both of those would be to miss the point. Like getting stuck on the finger and missing the moon. Or like spending an evening in a fabulous restaurant just reading the menu and never enjoying the food. These miracles are signs. They point to a feast. Jesus says, don't just read, eat. But what so often keeps us from enjoying that feast is fear. Fear that there really isn't enough food to go around. Fear that our boat is too small and we will drown. Fear that it all depends on us and we are not up to the job. Whether literally or metaphorically, so many of us live with those kinds of fears. Like Jesus' friends, we hunger, not just for food, but for justice. We fear not just the power of the storm, but the power of empire. 2,000 years later, in a place and a time, a world away from John's gospel, we still live in a world that defines itself by scarcity and fear. Our lives continue to be shaped by systems that dehumanize and diminish us, that thrive on keeping us believing that there isn't enough to go around, and that the forces we face are way too powerful for us. And so we internalize it, we believe it, and we blind ourselves to the abundance, the overflowing resources of God's good world, and we withhold the generosity and the creativity that could unleash it. We cower in despair at the challenges we face, instead of stepping up together and speaking out and trusting in God's goodness, God's faithfulness to hold us up when the waters are rising. Instead of leaning on the goodness of God, we choose hunger and fear because we refuse to open our eyes and see beyond it. So John sends up these signal flares to point us to the unexpected more. In these simple elements of bread and water, Jesus invites us to see the world through his eyes and to find the more in the small stuff. But see, this new sight doesn't change our reality. What it does do is allow us to see God at work within it. Because it's not the world outside that is transformed through these miracles, it is us. And then we can transform the world. The basics of bread and water that once meant subsistence living instead becomes experiences of the extravagant grace of God. And so the good news for us today is that those signs of hope and grace, they are always with us if we can open our eyes and see them. They may be hidden in the pockets of a young boy or found in the crashing waves of a storm, but they are there. And so let us pray that as we journey through this season of ordinary time, that we realize the extraordinary grace to be found in the small and simple things that are drenched in the goodness of God. Maybe then we can see the miracle that is living on bread and water. May it be so. Amen.